Welcome back to the Progressive Rehab and Strength Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Rori IG, here with my lovely co-host, as usual, Dr. Alyssa IG, and we are continuing on our barbell strength training journey here with you guys this month. We started with talking about the beginner barbell strength training program and then moving on to the importance of technique and the PRS lifting manual and how those principles in the lifting manual that are related to the squat, bench press, deadlift, and overhead press can be applied to any variation thereof of those exercises. And, eventually you won't be a beginner anymore and you won't be on a beginner program. So, kind of where do you go after that? Well, you might move on with coaching here at PRS, but we don't expect everyone to do that. So you'll find some type of template, or perhaps you'll write your own program, or you'll do something like the Texas method or 5-3-1, or follow a DUP style program. And one of the biggest things that we see here at PRS are injuries. And as physical therapists, as strength coaches, we've been the last resort for a lot of people, sometimes the first resort when they have an injury, but oftentimes the last resort when their coaches can't figure out what's going on with their injuries, their doctors tell them not to lift, their physical therapists give them random exercises to do, and then they go back to barbell training and still have the same problems over and over again. And it's not usually your technique alone. It's not usually your program alone. It's not usually an isolated muscle or labrum that's bothering you or whatever. It's usually a combination of a lot of things. So, what we want to talk today about in this episode is all of the things that go into beyond the program, beyond the technique, all the things that go into making your training sustainable, keeping you healthy under the barbell, regardless of the technique that you're using and regardless of the program that you're running in terms of your training program. So we do have 2 free resources that I'll just shout out at the beginning of this episode. We have our Sustainable Training Builder. It's a free resource for you guys. You can click the link in our show notes to access that. But basically, it monitors all of the things that we monitor in our athletes to help us make training decisions to keep them healthy. And we also have the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, which is an ebook filled with this, I say simple, the simple things that you can check off and address to make sure that you're supporting your recovery, you're supporting your technique, you're supporting your programming to keep your body healthy under the barbell. And we suggest doing all of these things in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, or at least looking at them and understanding them before seeking help out and assessing, are you doing these things? Can you implement these things, or are you already doing them and because you are doing them, you know that you really need help. So shouting those out, they're both linked in the show notes. But before we talk any more about that, what I want to talk about with you, Alyssa, are what are the key elements of programming that we monitor in order to help us identify a healthy range for training that leads to productive and meaningful training that leads to progress without injury. So what are some of those things that we're looking at when we're assessing someone's training or response to training?
Yeah. So, I mean, the big factors are relative intensity and
Mm-hmm.
RPE, and then performance, which we're monitoring through estimated 1RM. So,
Mm-hmm.
we really want to see, you know, how hard is somebody working on a session to session basis, and that might not just be how heavy is the weight. It could have to do with what's going on outside of training, their recovery, their sleep, their work stress, their life stress, and all of those things really play into that. I mean, we're ultimately monitoring the whole
The whole
the whole
picture.
person when looking at some of these variables. And you know, we want to monitor performance, and again, I said we're doing that through estimated 1RM, because when we start to see that decline consistently or plateau consistently, something is going on and we need to make changes to optimize performance and also reduce the risk of injury. If somebody's always their E1RM is going down all of the time, that's there's something going on, and we're not going to see, especially with someone who's not a novice, we're not going to see that increase every session. It's really
Mhm.
hard to see this, like, this
Mhm.
linear perfect line every time. But,
Right.
um, you know, really, I mean, the big factors are like the relative intensity, their recovery, their life, what's going on outside of training, and then that performance variable.
Yeah, and the research, so one thing that helps us understand someone's susceptibility for injury or susceptibility for making progress or not making progress is training fatigue. So when we look at how someone gets stronger, it's through this stress recovery adaptation process. And that stress is your training stress. So your number of reps, your number of sets, the load, and all the exercises you do within a training session. That's your training stress. And then your recovery is the time between training sessions, it's your sleep, it's your nutrition. But that training stress is also influenced by external factors to training. So, what's going on in your life outside of training? How long were you at work that day? That's your day stress, your life stress. What's going on in terms of your family life and your work stress and any other things that you're experiencing? The ability to progress and get stronger is not just training stress. um, and I think that there's a subset of people who forget about that, right? And then that recovery period is not just how much time there is between training sessions or how much time there is between squat sessions or bench press sessions. It's time, it's quality of sleep, it's the quantity of sleep, it's are you in a caloric deficit, surplus, maintenance, it's so all of these factors, right? So it's the stress recovery, and then put those two things together, and we get the strength adaptation. And that strength English dab. That strength adaptation is really your performance on that day, right? And we can measure the total training fatigue. So, how much you're not recovering between sessions, right? We can measure that through your performance. So, you look like you were about to say something.
Yeah. So, like everything you're talking about, I think is sometimes a really hard thing for people to accept when they're going into their training sessions saying, well, this shouldn't have felt that hard.
Right.
And why are my RPEs so high? And why can't I'm not finishing this set. And it's really, I think it's hard for people to objectively look at their life and think, well, I wasn't doing these things outside of training before, and now I am. And actually, I have a client right now that we go through this kind of on a yearly basis. They compete and train in dragon boat seasonally. So that season starts. And usually we see some changes that need to be addressed. And it's usually a week or so of check-ins going, I don't know why this felt so hard. And I don't, and
Right.
I'm like, well, let me know what your schedule is. And I just sent an email this week saying, last year I was the one that made the call to actually drop them down to 2 days a week because
Mhm.
now there was, 3, 4 days of
Mhm.
dragon boat training, and there was some hesitation, but ultimately it was beneficial. And that's where I always say, whatever works for you right now with whatever is going on in your life is the thing that's going to be the best for you. It doesn't mean that what's best for you is not to maintain the same frequency, training stress, volume when you add in these 3 or 4 days a week of strenuous cardiovascular activity that you weren't doing a month
Right.
ago. There something has to give, and if something doesn't give, then that's when we run into
Yeah.
problems.
And I think, there's an element of being able to add more things in and still recover, right? So, but to find that fine line is difficult, and we don't want to prematurely change a program if someone can still handle it and still wants to handle it, right? But we don't want to let something go for too long and then see a decline in performance. And we do know that chronically sustained high training fatigue can lead to injury, right? It can lead to injury and it can lead to illness. ultimately what we call it in like the exercise science realm is non-functional overreaching, and then ultimately overtraining. So the stress recovery adaptation process, that stress recovery range, is functional overreaching, right? And we want that. And we can push that a little bit. And there's this gray area where we'll be able to maintain it. And then we kind of pass that line and get into non functional overreaching, which at the very beginning of non functional overreaching, you might not recognize it. And you might not, it might be that, like, oh, like just tired today, or like, I thought I could do two more, but really like five was my limit, or something like that. And you don't necessarily see it right away that you're in this middle range between functional overreaching and overtraining. So if we stay in this non-functional overreaching range for too long, we are susceptible to loss of training motivation, injuries, illness, etc. Like sustained, not like non-sustained. We can still recover from it, but we might be set back a little bit, right? And then if we're in this range for way too long, we're gonna tip the boat and we're gonna fall into this overtraining range, and that's where we start to see like long-term strength loss, poor performance, cessation of training, but we see injuries, and other things arise in that non-functional overreaching range. So we have to have some way of, aside from just like guessing or making an assumption of something. I mean, sure, we can do that, but we're not going to make the best training decisions. Like, if we can make a better training decision, let's make a better training decision. So how do we see that? And in literature, there's really no quick, easy, accurate way to measure training fatigue. You can measure it through blood work. You can measure it with like devices to measure strength and performance that aren't your actual performance. You can measure it through a one rep max test, but like, who's going to go into the gym and test their one rep max on every training session, right? So the most accurate and easiest way to measure the accumulation of training fatigue in a negative way, is through a decrease in performance. But I would argue that we don't want to see a decrease in performance, right? So we don't want to get to the point where our performance is decreasing. Or the best way to measure training fatigue is through watching someone's performance. If their performance continues to progress in a positive direction, then we know that their training fatigue is not exceeding their ability to recover. But if someone's performance is declining, then their training fatigue has exceeded their ability to recover. So we need to be in a recovered state to perform well, or we need to be recovered enough to perform well on that training day. Now, like we said, there's ways to measure training fatigue, that are non-performance based, but most people don't have access to that. So what, or don't want to spend the money to have a hand dynamometer to test their grip strength every day. And it's not beneficial or productive towards your training to test a 1RM every single day. So there are different ways that you can implement a 1RM in training, or a sub max rep, single rep. I know that there is a coach or programmer who specifically has people work up to like a 3-rep set at an RP 8. So it's not a max set or a single at an RP 8 or 9, which isn't a max training effort, but you can then extrapolate your performance based on estimated 1RM. So that how hard that set of 3 was, at what load. So the number of reps, the load, and the rating of perceived exertion, you can then extrapolate that and get an estimated 1RM, which is a measure of training fatigue. So that's an actual piece or element of the training that you can implement, which you would do on a particular day to see how you're feeling or how you're performing, and then base your numbers off of that. But that's more of a prescriptive way to track training performance and recovery. And we've talked about this in the past. We do not use rating of perceived exertion in a prescriptive way. We want to be able to measure performance over time and in advance and make predictions about someone's performance before it starts to decline, right? And I think that's what's really unique to our system or our method is that we're looking at performance through estimated 1RM. So training performance is measured by taking the load you lift, the effort you perceived that set to be, and the number of reps that you did to give us a training number called estimated 1RM, which helps us track our performance over time. And then looking at that over time can help us see if our training is moving in a positive direction, meaning our recovery is outpacing our performance is outpacing our, I'm saying that backwards. We're recovering enough to perform well. And if it's flatlining, we're not making any training progress, but we're not really going backwards or get in that injury range yet. And then if it's declining, then we're in this negative training space where we're not recovering, our training fatigue is high, and we're more susceptible to injury in the coming days or weeks in our training, right?
I think it's worth mentioning that there are, some people and that there are like calculations for estimated 1RM that don't take into account
Mm-hmm.
RPE and how
Mm-hmm.
hard the set was. And, there might be some people that use those. But the problem that we run into with that is really that you're going to get the same estimated 1RM if you did a
Right.
set of 3 at 225, whether it was a 10 or whether it was a 6.
Right. It lacks
So,
the performance
yeah,
the total description of the performance. And that's like what's exactly key in measuring training fatigue is looking at someone's performance. So you can do 225 for a set of 3 on Monday and on Wednesday. And on Wednesday, you might perform it so much faster than you did on Monday. And how do we turn that performance into a value so that we can measure it over time? And that's the use of rating of perceived exertion and estimated 1RM. And I think that is what separates our training method is it we're using RPE descriptively, and we're tracking performance trends and training fatigue over time to see the elements of training fatigue and recovery arise before you're in the training session where you're going to have the problem. And so that kind of ties us into the sustainable training builder, which is something that we've spent a lot of time working on. And we use it with our clients very strategically, with all of our clients. And you should be looking at your performance on a day to day basis, on an exercise basis, a training session basis, a weekly basis, a monthly and annual basis, right? And you should be looking at how your exercises within a training session affect one another, how your training sessions earlier in the week affect the training sessions later in the week, how your weekend recovery, whatever you do. Sometimes we don't have like R&R weekends, like sometimes I feel like trash on Monday because my weekend was so busy. I didn't have time to rest. My nutrition was off. I had a birthday party, a baby shower, a wedding, and a movie night. And then I come into Monday and I'm like, I need to go to sleep instead of train, and I need to eat a cucumber instead, you know? So we look at that stuff on and how much training stress is there within a week, how much training stress is occurring week to week, and our sustainable training builder will look at that. So what you can do is head to the link in our bio. We're not on Instagram here. We're on podcast platform wherever you're watching this, and you can head to the link in the description to download the free sustainable training builder. So what this can do is you can build your training whatever program you're on. It doesn't have to be like something that we prescribe. It doesn't have to be like our training template or format. It doesn't have to be anything that we like. But you can apply our sustainable training method and monitor your training fatigue over time to then make changes to your program before shit hits the fan. And I think that is the biggest thing that causes people to become injured, is that they're hitting the fan. They're throwing their shit into the fan, so to speak. You know, like you're not like, let's just dump that shit in the toilet and flush it. Sorry, my mind is still on potty training. No, my kid's
It's
like
the
all
theme.
potty trained, but like every day is like, do you have to poop? Do you have to pee? Like, what are we doing? No, but seriously, in all seriousness, we don't want things to go awry, right? We can track those trends over time, and you will see a decline in your performance show up in estimated 1RM before it actually shows up in the gym. And this is tried and true within the hundreds of clients that we work with on an annual basis here at PRS. You know, we always say that injuries are not avoidable. They're going to happen, you know, but we can keep them at the lowest possible level. We can avoid major tears. We can avoid major back tweaks, things that take, and we can avoid going backwards and poor performance and taking pounds and kilos off your total in competition. You know, we can avoid all of that by implementing this method. And even if you get like a small tweak, I say this over and over again, our clients will continue to train. We'll keep having our clients train, and they'll be out of that little tweak within a week or two, you know? But you don't want to get to a point where you have to stop training, or not stop training, but instead of like going back 10%, you're going back to the empty bar. You know, we never want to get to that point. So seeing this stuff show up in your training log on your trends sheet will help you decide to make a change. And like I said in one of our recent episodes when we were talking about RPE, I said it can be a very small tweak. So maybe you're doing the Texas method and you're running a 5x5 on Monday. We got 5x5 squat, we got 5x5 bench, and we got a 5x3 power clean. It's a lot of freaking volume, right? And we don't want, like, if all your sets are max effort sets, that training session gets really long. There's not a lot of recovery within that training session. It's going to affect your training sessions later in the week, and you're at higher susceptibility for injury. So now you notice, okay, let's say you've been doing 5x5s and they've been pretty easy, but now they're starting to, you know, the first set's a 7, RP7, the second set's an RP8, then an 8, then an 8.5, and a 9. At that point, I would say change something, because we can sustain a 5x5 much longer if we make a small tweak. So we keep moving that easy top set up, but the remaining 4 sets are at a 5 or 10% drop, and that decreases the training stress just a little bit so that you can keep progressing your 5x5 without running into a wall. And without that 5x5 squat affecting your bench press later in the training session, or affecting your heavy squat later in the week, you know? So definitely you can see those things a little bit more clearly and sooner when you use the type of system that we use.
I think that some people sometimes are hesitant to make changes to programming, or even add back offsets. And I think the thing that's really important to keep in mind is that we can't, like, eventually something has to give. We can't always add weight and maintain the volume forever. Something has to change. And so, especially as we're talking about not, like, changing things before shit hits the fan. To those who want to keep progressing at the 5x5 forever and not get to a point where they have to change something, you're going to have to sooner or later.
Well, and to your point, we can't keep going forever. And I think that, there are some schools of thought that say don't change something until you fail. Okay? But if we go to what the literature says, that a failure is a decrease in performance. If you were able to do a 5x5 last week, but this week you can't add 2.5 pounds and complete your 5x5, that's a decrease in performance. Okay. And that decrease in performance means that training fatigue is too high already. So we're not of the school of thought that you want to fail and then change something. We want to change something before you fail so that you don't have to fail, and that failure that failure is a demonstration of, is the representation that training fatigue is already too high, right? And think about it, if you're willing to put yourself into a position where you're going to fail, you're at a much higher risk for injury, because when you fail, one, the training intensity is too high, your technique really breaks down, and now you're at a load that's too heavy for you, and your technique is suboptimal. So that sets you even higher, sets you in an even worse position for injury, you know? So, again, we don't want to see that decline in performance. We want to make those changes before we see a decline physically in performance in the gym. So we can see that in estimated 1RM a week or two before that happens. That makes sense?
Yep.
So, with that all said, we're not done with this episode yet, but I'm going to give you another call to action to bring your attention to the description of this podcast episode wherever you're watching it or listening to it, to download your, or get, yeah, I think it's a download, I don't know, get some free access. We have set up for you to get a free sustainable training builder. It's an Excel spreadsheet. It's a 4-week template training log that you can input your own program into, and build track, log your training basically, and you can just duplicate that month, over that empty month, over and over and over again, and track your training in there. Every 4 weeks you can just make like a new training block. But anyway, so that is really, really important. But then we also have something called the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, because healthy, sustainable training is not only the program. The program is a huge piece of it, but there are elements of technique, equipment, and things outside of training or outside of barbell training that can also influence your ability to stay healthy, which is why we call it the Healthy Barbell Training Guide. So, pause for a second because I don't have that up anymore. Can you pull it up also?
I have it up.
Oh, you do?
I didn't restart my computer.
I know. Oh, I have it here. So, Alyssa, even though I authored the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, do you want to share a little bit about what this is? And, before we dive into what the Healthy Barbell Training Guide is, I just want to really, when we talk about it, I just want to really talk about, what elements we talk about in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide. But for those of you listening who want to dive into some of these elements a little bit deeper, this Healthy Barbell Training Guide I developed long ago. I don't even know what year. What year is on this? 2018. Wow, 5 years ago. Before we started teaching our online courses, and in programming fundamentals, I really developed this concept of the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training. So we have a podcast on the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training, and I think we have an article. So I'll also link those in the show notes as well. But you'll see hints of the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, with some other elements, because some of the elements of that group of training elements, I keep saying elements, are very similar, like joint synchrony or rigidity and tension and all that kind of stuff. They can be grouped together, but we break them down a little bit further in our course. So anyway, I think the Healthy Barbell Training Guide was really where I kind of founded the idea of those 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training. So anyway, without further ado, Alyssa, can you share what the Healthy Barbell Training Guide is and what elements we cover in there?
Yeah. So, as lifters, clients, trainees, become more experienced, become stronger, are no longer novices, there are a lot of details to training that matter. And here at PRS, we would argue that what you do as a novice matters a lot. But the longer you've been training and the more the higher level of advancement you are as a lifter, the more that the little details matter in keeping you healthy, helping you continue to make progress, and like ultimately just keeping you in the gym without having setbacks and like feeling like you're doing well, because we also, we care about motivation here. And if you're starting to get frustrated with something that might be caused by a small detail that could be fixed, we want to address that. So
Well, I just want to quickly interrupt you there to talk about like why that is the case. So as when you're a novice, things are really easy for a really long time. You're not, especially the way that we program. If you kind of go back 2 episodes and you listen to that, the first episode in this series where we talk about beginning barbell strength training, you're not going to be using max loads. The loads are going to be really light because we're really focused on your technical development, but we also talk about your technique doesn't have to be perfect to add weight because it takes a long time to develop good technique, rep, uh, replicable technique from rep to rep, set to set, all those kinds of things. So initially, like Alyssa said, those little minor details are not going to matter when the load is light and you're still learning the gross movements of barbell training. But then as we transition out of novice into heavier loads on a regular basis, and you've refined the major components of barbell movement, then we can say, how do we take it one step further to get better and also stay healthy, right?
yeah, so in the healthy barbell training guide, we are really talking about, again, those details outside of just the bigger picture technique, the programming that matter. And to go through some of those, eye gaze, which is something that a lot of people uh, don't think about when they're training. Where are you looking? Some people do, some people aren't really sure, aren't confident with it, or when you change a location. So if you're usually in the gym that you're at home, and then you go to a meet, or you're traveling, you go to a different gym, well, what you're looking at is different. um so you might not end up looking in the same spot, but these things matter, and really understanding where you're looking, why you're looking there, and that it really shouldn't change no matter what your environment is around you, will like help you stay healthy, perform better, and also be consistent regardless of where you are. Your
Mhm.
spot should look the same. You should be, have the same focal point eye gaze no matter where you are while you're training. Rory, do you want to go into,
No, I think I
well,
just
because
want
we do cover eye
we
gaze
cover
like
we cover eye gaze
episodes ago.
in a lot of episodes. I mean, when you if you I just want to kind of discuss what's in the healthy barbell training guide, and why the things are important. So yeah, I mean, eye gaze is extremely important because it helps you stay focused, it helps you stay balanced, and it helps the bar stay the bar path stay straight, and it helps you be able to just execute the lift really much better. So but can yeah, so if you are interested in understanding eye gaze more, you can go to the article on, we discuss it in the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training podcast episode and article. So the next important thing in training that can keep you healthy is
Breathing.
breathing. And this is the Valsalva maneuver. And, we also have a whole episode on the Valsalva maneuver. But breathing is really important. There's so many different ways that people talk about breathing in resistance training. And there's so many myths around breathing. But we bust that in the Valsalva episode. So we'll link that also. But we dive into exactly how to breathe and why it's important in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide. And what's the next thing?
So balance, and also keeping the bar over your midfoot, really where the bar is moving in space matters, which is important to your balance and keeping the bar balanced and making your movement efficient, reducing any loss of energy or loss of
Mhm.
force as you're performing the lift. So it can ultimately help you lift more weight and reduce your risk of injury as well.
Which is the chronic theme here appears.
Yeah. And so I just want to say one of the things that I really love about this as we're going through these is that, a lot of people know what they're doing, but not why.
Mhm.
So if anyone is listening who wants to know why you're doing so, even if you're already doing things this
Mhm.
way, but you don't necessarily know why just because somebody told you to, or found one of our articles and read it,
Mhm.
or just looked at the headings and didn't read the why, go through and understand why, because there is a reason for everything. So the next part of the Healthy Barbell Training Guide is joint timing and joint synchrony. And we love synchrony here.
Mm.
So really we want all of your joints to lock and unlock at the same time and the same rate, uh, regardless of what lift you're doing.
Mhm.
And so,
No, I mean, I think it's this joint synchrony. I mean, these are all. It's just it's like I could give you 1,000 examples for all of these things. Joint timing. So if you definitely read the Healthy Barbell Training Guide to understand what that means, and you can go back to the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training episode and article, because these are like little things that you can check yourself, and if they're not optimized and you optimize them, you might resolve your issue. And then you don't need a coach or you don't need a doctor or physical therapist to help you with your issue. So, like, these are the little things that I would say check through video analysis or have someone else check or whatever, to see if you make those changes. But give yourself a little bit of time to feel that if these changes are making a difference. You're probably gonna have to drop the load just a little bit, and give it a couple weeks to see if it's resolving the symptoms. Like, I've fixed someone's elbow pain on the bench press just by taking their eye gaze and making them look straight up versus following the bar when they lift. And I felt terrible for charging them $250 for an evaluation. And
yeah.
that's actually how the Healthy Barbell Training Guide became a free guide, because I didn't want to do that anymore. I didn't want someone to come to me anymore for like the most obvious thing to me that was so easy to fix, that if they just knew about it and tried it themselves, they would resolve the issue. They didn't they don't need us for that. So these are the things that like you can do in combination with monitoring your training fatigue and performance, um, to say, am I overtraining, or is it a technical thing that like a technical tweak I can make that just like, or two little things that you can change between lowering your training intensity and tweaking your eye gaze or your joint synchrony, and then you feel better, and your performance starts to increase. So,
And if you're
um,
struggling with one aspect, don't overlook the other things that we talk about in here. And I'll just give an example. A lot of things cascade.
mhm, mhm,
um, so if you are struggling to keep the bar over your midfoot during squat, for example, because we like the squat to
mhm,
use
mhm.
an
It's always our
example,
example.
you know, simply thinking about keeping the bar over your midfoot might not be the solution, but I
Mhm,
wouldn't overlook your joint timing and your joint synchrony, because
mhm,
that's really a big one that affects that. I mean, that's just one example, but assess everything, try everything, um, especially when it comes to this guide and also the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training. They, correcting one thing often will change something else or
mhm.
multiple somethings else. Um,
We don't
but
speak English on this
yeah,
podcast.
it's hard. So the next thing that we go over in this guide is what's going on with your accessory joints, meaning the joints that aren't directly involved with moving the bar to perform the lift. And especially if you're having pain in those joints, and again, I'm going to use squat as an example. If you're squatting and you
Mhm.
have wrist pain or
Mhm.
shoulder pain, but like, wrist pain is one that if you there are things that we can do. Oftentimes we see people who have bar too low, wrists are really
Mhm.
bent, hands are too close. And that doesn't mean, if you're having pain with that, that does not mean that you can't squat.
Mhm.
Likely there are some adjustments that can be made to reduce the stress on those joints. And for joints, for example, like your wrist, keep it neutral.
Mhm.
Try not to have the bar rolling back into your hand. But so when you're having pain in accessory joint, assess whether or not you are placing excess stress on it, and if it is moving. Also, and again, pulling eye gaze into this, if your neck is extended and or you're throwing your head back while you're squatting and you're having neck pain, well, you're probably not keeping your eyes on that focal point.
Mhm.
But your neck doesn't need to do that in order for you to squat at
Mhm.
all.
Mhm.
But these things are all very much related.
Yeah, I mean, oh god, the squat. It's like such a good example because you could have wrist pain or shoulder pain when you squat, and it could be because you are throwing your elbows up to help you stand up, or dropping your elbows on the way down and pushing them up on the way up, or it could be because you're moving your head back on the way up, and this is causing motion of the bar. So there's so many reasons why you could be having pain in your wrist, but if we kind of check all the boxes to make sure the accessory joints aren't moving, your eye gaze is fixed, your bar you're staying balanced over the midfoot, then the bar should stay put, and hopefully you won't have wrist pain. But then what's not in this is joint neutrality, which is part of the 9 elements of safe and effective barbell training, which came later from this healthy barbell training guide. But these are really key elements that if you check all of these, you should start to see a reduction in your symptoms. So the next couple of things that we have in the safe and effective barbell, not safe, in the healthy barbell training guide are non barbell related um, things. So, one, are you warming up properly? And we're not talking about like a dynamic. Oh well, two. We are talking about dynamic warm up. One, there are some people who need to do more of a warm up than just lifting the bar as their warm up. So if you're someone who like you feel like you warm up enough, but like you've checked all of those first five things, you're still experiencing symptoms, you've got your training um, intensity and fatigue in check, and maybe implement a dynamic warm up because before putting the bar on your back. So this could be like riding the bike for 5 minutes or doing some cat camel in your spine and some like high knees and butt kicks and stuff just to get moving and flowing before you get under the barbell. Some people really need that. It could be depending on the time of day that you're training. Like maybe you get back pain when you train early in the morning, but you don't when you train in the evening. Well, you've been sleeping for 8 hours first thing in the morning. So I remember there was a kid that I worked with. There was like one technical change that I made to his deadlift and his squat, and we made some progress. But then the real thing that made all the difference for him was doing a dynamic warm up before he got under the barbell. That was it. That was like really all he needed to feel better and train better. So are you doing the right warm up for you? Some people can just get under the barbell. Some people need a little bit more time, you know? And then how you approach your warm up sets. Like we have the PRS warm up calculator. So there's a couple things with the warming up. Are you doing too much volume in your warm up? Are you not doing enough warm up sets? But then also, are you like lackadaisically going through your warm ups? I think that a lot of injuries that I've seen in the past happen on, it's like, oh, it was just my like third warm up and I tweaked my back. Well, you were talking, you didn't, like you were doing not paying attention, you were not really focused on your technique, and then you tweaked your back. So we have to treat all of our sets as if they're meaningful load. So we want to make sure that we're, you know, once we're touching that barbell and moving it with it, we're serious.
The other thing is that, your warm up sets are an opportunity for you to practice
Mm-hmm.
anything you're working on, what you're going to do at your heavier sets. And as a coach, I can often tell when somebody isn't taking their warm up sets seriously, when they're not thinking about my feedback until the weight gets heavier. And it usually just shows in, poor implementation of my feedback.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm usually right when I ask that question. But yeah, your warm up sets really, I always say they shouldn't look like if I didn't see where the plates would be on the
Mm-hmm.
bar, aside from the speed that the
Mm-hmm.
bar is moving, the pace of the set should not be different. They shouldn't look different. You should be breathing. You should be locking out your joints. It's it's practice for what you're
Mm-hmm.
going to be doing. I mean, it makes sense to me. It's
Yeah.
one of my pet peeves, honestly, when I see you shouldn't be talking,
No, I
you know.
totally agree. That's why it's in here. But more details in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide on what we mean about the dynamic warm up and warming up. And there is in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, there is a free link for another PDF, which is our dynamic warm up that we generally recommend to most people if they need a dynamic warm up. Um, Things do not have to be super specific. Um, Most of the time it's just because you're not moving enough and you're not warm enough before you get under the barbell. So it doesn't have to be super specific. It's not like a thing in your body that needs to be addressed. It's like generalized. So the dynamic warm up that we give you in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide is golden, tried and true. Tried and tested. I don't know what that. Whatever that phrase
He's
is.
tried and true.
Tried and true. Tried and tested. Tried and true. I don't know.
You make up new phrases
I make
so
up new
long. I just
words and
let it
phrases all the
go.
time. It's totally fine. It's like toddlers, right? They make up shit all the time. Like, can you tell I have a 2.5-year-old at home? Okay, so the last two things in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide are you using a belt or have you not started using a belt yet? And are you using your belt properly and does it fit you correctly? So all of that stuff is linked in there. So one, start using a belt if you're not using a belt. You got to make sure it's fitting you correctly and that you're using it correctly. So not actually, we do have an episode, a 10-minute tip episode on belts. And we talk about belts. I'm sure we have a couple episodes. I'll put the links to our belt episodes in the show notes here. And then the last thing, which ties into looking at training recovery and training fatigue, is making sure you're getting enough sleep to recover, which is not always possible. I totally get that, which is why we need to be tracking our training response, our response to training through estimated 1RM to see we can continue to train in a poorly slept state if we are watching our training trends and making changes in response to our recovery, which we measure through estimated 1RM. So, sleep is important, though not always possible. And if we just adjust the program in response to how we are responding to lack of sleep, then we should be okay. All right, folks. So far, you should have downloaded the Beginner Barbell Strength Training Program or the home program that we've got. And you should understand how to begin barbell training. You should also understand barbell training technique because you've downloaded our PRS lifting manual. And we also linked in the last episode, we didn't really talk about it, but we have the Barbell Athlete's Guide to Filming Lifts because if you're self coaching, you can't make all these changes that we've talked about in the Healthy Barbell Training Guide if you're not visually seeing your lifts and checking your technique.
You're not going to feel it all.
You're not going to feel
If
all
you
of this.
think you can feel everything that's happening, you are wrong.
So we'll link also to the Barbell Athlete's Guide to Filming Lifts in this episode as well. But in our last episode on the PRS lifting manual, we also shared in the show notes the Barbell Athlete's Guide to Filming Lifts. And in this episode, we've linked to the Sustainable Training Builder, which you can use any barbell program. We don't care what program you're using. We just want you to monitor and assess and change your program to avoid poor performance, injuries, etc. And then we also have the Healthy Barbell Training Guide, which you can download and use that before jumping to hiring someone to fix you, if that makes sense. Lastly, we've got some more free resources. We have our free Facebook group, the Secret Society of Barbell Mastery on Facebook, where we do free form checks. We answer your questions. We do a live Q&A once a month, usually. That's the last Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we also have our newsletter, which you can get on. You can get our podcast episodes early, and we do a free literature review and free case study every month. So we have so many free resources for you guys to get help from us, learn from us, implement your own programs, and then if all else fails, book a free consultation with us. The link for that is also in the show notes, or you can get that on our website. Just go to like the contact and book a free consult button. And we'd be happy to speak with you to discuss what's going on and see if there's a way that we can help you or refer you to someone or some type of person that can help you better than we can. So, with that all said, we thank you so much for joining us here on the Progressive Rehab and Strength podcast, and we look forward to the next time. Bye for now.